learn for the welfare of the people in Israel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let us begin.
Could everybody else please mute? There's a lot of background noise.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Basically, let us begin. Today's Daf Lamed Beis. Let's just start off with just like two or three pictures over here. This is what we learned yesterday, and Steve mentioned this, and it's interesting. In addition to the Kohen being a holy man, he had to be somewhat of an athlete, and basically, he had to slaughter the animal. We learned yesterday he slaughtered it just making it kosher. He slaughtered most of the windpipe and the food pipe, and then had to hand it off to somebody else, as you can see in this picture over here. And slaughtering an animal, it requires a certain very dexterous, he has steady hands, and he had to do this numerous times in Yom Kippur. So it wasn't simple. So he must have been in good shape. Of course, we discussed, the kind of services that he does. The other picture I wanted to bring to your attention is we're familiar with the service that he did with the white clothing. Not with the gold clothing, with the white clothing, where he, poured the ketoris onto the coals.
I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt. Is everyone having the same problem I'm having? I'm not hearing very well. Maybe I just have to go out and come in again.
Maybe I should.
Is it just me? I'm not sure if it's just me. Maybe it's my phone.
No, sometimes he moves the mic a little bit closer or further, so the closer to his mouth, the better.
Okay, so now I'm gonna straighten it out.
Yeah, I hardly hear anything.
Okay, hold on.
Maybe it's me because I really don't hardly hear anything. If anyone's having that same problem, maybe it's just a general problem, but otherwise it might be my
Do
phone.
you hear me now? Do you hear
Very
me now?
little, very faint.
No,
faintly.
I hear you.
Okay, so you know what? I'm going to try to go. I'm going to come in again. Maybe it's just.
I put up the volume. Now you can hear me?
No, I'm going to try to come in again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because
Okay.
I hear you
Okay.
clearly.
I'm going to come
Okay.
in again.
Okay. Oh, wait. Okay. You hear me?
Yes, much better. I just had to
Okay.
go. I had to log on again. I'm fine.
Perfect. Okay. So this is a picture of the Kohen Gadol putting the ketoris onto the coals in the base in the Kodesh Kodashim. Notice he's wearing the 4 garments instead of the normal 8 garments. Then I want to point out to you we learned yesterday also that when he switches out of clothing, he had to wash his hands and feet with a jug. Usually they would put it on his hands and feet. And notice how when he would go into the mikveh, there was a whole bunch of Kahanim standing around blocking the view from everybody from looking as he undresses and steps into the mikveh.
Why is it okay for everybody else for 364 other days to use the mikvah, unless nobody else uses that mikvah?
Beautiful.
To not be blocked.
Beautiful. That's a great question. So I'll point out to you the answer right now. The answer is because here, the pasuk over here, in this pasuk in Pashas Achrei says, "V'rochatzes besora b'mayim b'makom kodesh." Here, the Torah stresses on Yom Kippur that he has to go to the mikvah in the Beis Hamikdash, in the holy place. So therefore, they had to make this mikvah into the Kodesh Kodashim, and probably it had to do with plumbing and where to put the mikvah. Again, this has to do with the water spring that was on a high mountain, a higher mountain from a distance that came somehow to the Beis Hamikdash. So it came into an open area, and therefore they had this makeshift sheets going around. One more point I want to point out is that at the end of the day, this is very important, the Kohen Gadol would come back into the Kodesh Kodashim and remove the spoon and the shovel. Very important. He left the spoon and shovel there, and it's almost like he had to clean up after the end of the day. And this is important. So now that we have everything all set up, let us begin. Okay. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. The pasuk, you're going to have to keep in mind, this is the pasuk. Listen to this pasuk. This is the pasuk talking about during the service. The Torah says, it's like at the end of the service. Aaron walks back into the Kodesh Kodashim. Ufashad his big day habad. He takes off the Yom Kippur clothing, Asher Lavas, B'Voyel Kodesh, V'Nichem Sham, and then puts it away. Never uses it again. Then he goes to the mikvah. Then he puts on his regular clothing, and he does the oila and the oila sa'am. There's a special special ram that was done, and his ram and the ram of the people. That was a service done on the outside. Now, if the way the pasuk is set up, it seems that he ends the day pretty early, and then the rest of the day is with his gold clothing. But the Gemara wants to know, what does it mean he walks back into the Oyel Moed? What does this mean? What does this pasuk mean? Uva aharoin el Oyel Moed. Hi, Alan.
Hi.
So we just started. What does this pasuk mean? It seems that he walks into the Kodesh Kodashim and then takes off his linen clothing. What does he do in the Kodesh Kodashim? I already described it. Tanu Rabban, the rabbis taught, Uva aharoin el Oyel Moed. The Kohen would walk into the Oyel Moed basically, it doesn't mean the sanctuary, it means the Kodesh Kodashim. So the Gemara asks, Lama Huba, why did he walk in there? He only comes there, Elohoitzi as a kaf, as a machbi. He takes out the spoon and the shovel that he left there. And then the Gemara tells us, if you read Parshas Achrei Mos, everything makes sense. Parasha Kula Nemra Al HaSeder. The whole Parshas Achrei Mos, where it describes the service of the Kohen Gadol, was said in the proper sequence. Chutz, except mi pasuk zeh. This pasuk is not the correct order. Why? My time. What would be the reason? Why is it not in the correct order? Because we have a halacha l'Moshe Messinai. Amar Rav Chizda says, Gemiri, we have a halacha l'Moshe Messinai. Chomesh tvilos. 5 times the Kohen Gadol goes to the mikvah, and va'asara kedushim, and 5 times he does washing the hands and feet. Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Toivel Kohen Gadol mekadesh b'yom. Then the Kohen Gadol does that during the day. The Kesidron, if you read the Chumash the way it's written, the Chumash only describes a one-time switch from gold to white, and then from white to gold, right? So you only have to go into the mikveh 3 times, because when you switch the clothing, you're always going into the mikveh. Before you put on the clothing, you go into the mikveh. And each time you switch, you have to have Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, the Shisha Kedushin, and you have 6 Kiddush Yadayim, if you read the Chumash straight. But now that we took one pasuk out of order, we're going to have the situation like this. You start off with the gold clothing, you go back to the white clothing, then you go back to the gold clothing, you go to the white clothing for that final just takeout, and then you switch back into the gold clothing. So basically you went 5 times switching clothing, double that, and that's how much Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So if you want to see how that is matches up, look at this. This is very important. When the first time he's toivel, he goes to the mikvah, he puts on the gold clothing, then he does the first kiddush. After he puts on the gold clothing, you do wash your hands and feet, and the avodah is chutz. The avodah is on the outside, doing the carbon tamid and things like that, not in the main sanctuary. Then he does a kiddush, because when you take off your clothing, when you take off the clothing of the kohen, he does the second kiddush yadayim raglayim. So you need a kiddush yadayim raglayim. Let me just point out, before you put on the clothing, when you first put it on, and then when you take it off. So, but before you right after you put it on, you do the avodah. But before you take it off, you do the second kiddush. Then you do again the mikvah. You're back into the linen clothing. That's when he brought where he did the service inside the Kodesh Kodashim. Then he switched out to the gold clothing to do the avodas chutz, which is the oilus, the aisle, the oila, the extra things that could be done outside. And then he switched back into the linen clothing for the second time as the 4th tefillah. and then took out, all he did with this fourth time was just take out the spoon and shovel. Now, he could have waited around, and I just wanted to point out, the Kohen Gadol could have waited around till this whole instance was done, and then take out the spoon and shovel right then and there. He didn't have to come in again. But we know Sinai that he has to go back inside, and we have to have 10 times 5 times going to the mikveh and 10 times doing Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. In order to work that out, we separate it. He leaves the smoking thing in there and then does other things, then comes back and takes it out. And the final part of the day is he does the afternoon carbon tamid. So now you understand the whole structure of the Gemara. Tanya, we learned in a brisa. Back into the Gemara. Tanya, we learned in a brisa. Minayin, Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, Minayin, how do I know? How do I know it's 5 times in the mikveh and 10 times you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim on that day? Now, we know it's a halacha l'mashim Sinai, but I would have thought that he goes to the mikveh 5 times and straight, or goes to Kiddush Yadayim 10 times, 1, 2, 3, one after another. How do I know? I separate it out when he's changing the guard, when he's changing his clothing. Talmud Loima, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the pasuk says, "V'ora haron al koyin, fashas bigdei abad." You take off the linen clothing. V'rachatz means you go to the mikvah, b'sorei b'mayim, b'mokam kodesh, and like you said, Steve, that we pointed out that the mikveh has to be in the Beis Hamikdash, so the mikveh is in the Beis Hamikdash. Then he puts on clothing, v'yotzav v'asa. He puts on his normal clothing and he goes out. This is this pasuk over here. V'ora haron koyin. Poshet is big day abad asher lavash b'boy al kodesh v'nichem sham. V'nichem sham means you don't leave it there. He takes it off and he puts it away that he never uses it again. Then he goes to the mikvah and he puts on the gold clothing and he does the oilas ha'am. So Rabbi Yehuda sees over there that you have to go to the mikvah. So halamadra, this teaches you shekol hamashana ma'avoida la'avoida ta'un tvila. When you go from one service to another, when you change your clothing from the linen, the holy clothing that you wore on Yom Kippur to the normal clothing, you have to do a tefillah. And so we know that you have to do tefillah. So since you're going to switch that about 5 times, and we know when you take off, when you put it on, you have to do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. And when you take it off, you have to do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So we know that you need 10 Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim and 5 times Tefillah. So basically what this pasuk just told you is that when you change your clothing, go to the mikveh. That's what the pasuk says. That's Rabbi Yehuda's source. Rabbi has another source. Amar Rabbi says, Manayin, how would I know that when you switch your clothing, you have to go to the mikveh and do Kiddushin? How do I know it? Because there's a pasuk right in the beginning of Parshas Achrei, where it describes what the linen clothing that the Kohen Gadol wore. It was just 4 simple garments. He puts on a shirt, a linen pants, that's on his flesh. And he puts on a belt of linen. And his hat was made of linen, yitznaif. And these are the special clothing he wore on Yom Kippur. Big day kodesh, these are holy clothing. Before he puts them on, here the Torah again says you go to the mikvah. From this pasuk you can learn when he's switching out from clothing to clothing, ta'un tvila, you need to go to the mikvah. So that's what Rebbe's source. It's an earlier source pasuk of Kesainis Bal Kodesh. Now I want to point out to you the difference between Rabbi Yehuda's source and Rebbe's source is when you're switching out from the gold clothing into the linen clothing, to the Yom Kippur clothing, you need to go to the mikvah. By Rabbi Yehuda's source, the person was switching out of the linen clothing, going into the gold clothing. In both cases, the Torah says go to the mikvah. So we'll see more about that in a moment. First, there's another pasuk. V'oimer, Rebbe adds these strange words. Big day kodesh. The pasuk says, "Ksaynos bad kodesh yizbosh." Big day kodesh. They are holy clothing. What does the pasuk teach you with that? That they're holy clothing. Hukshu kala bagadim kulan zelazeh. That means that the Big Day Zahav and Big Day Lavam have the same din. That just like when you switch to the Big Day Lavam, to the linen clothing, you have to go to the mikvah. So also, if you switch from linen back to gold, you also have to go to the mikvah because there's a hekesh. That's what Rebbe learned from that pasuk. Now we're going to say the chomesh. Now the Brisa just explains it. What I spoke out. The chomesh avodas haim. There are 5 services done on that day. First, you did Talmud Shel Shachar, the morning normal carbon Talmud. You did it the Big Day Zahav with the gold clothing. Avodas hayoim the Big Day Lavim. The service of Yom Kippur, specific for Yom Kippur, which is the goats, and then bringing the Ketores into the Kodesh Kodashim, the bull, right? The par, all was done in the white clothing. Then, Eloi ve'el ha'am be'Big Day Zahav. When he did the special ram oila, right? There was a special ram that was brought on a carbon oila for him and for the people. So that he put on the gold clothing to do that. Then he put back on he put back on his linen clothing to take out the kaf umachta bebigilam, to take out the shovel and the spoon, and he put that back on his linen clothing. Then he took it off. Tamid shabein abayim the Big Day Zahav. He did the tamid of the afternoon, and it also means the musaf as well. Prior to the tamid, he did the regular Yom Kippur musaf, and then the tamid shabein abayim Big Day Zahav. So you have 5 times a switch. 5 times a switch is requires you to go to the mikveh 5 times. So now the Gemara asks, Umanayin, how would I know that Shekol Tvila, every time you go to the mikveh, Shekol Tvila, Tzrika Shnei Kiddushim. How do I know that you'd have to have Kiddush Yadayim Raglaim twice? How do I know you have to have Kiddush Yadayim Raglaim twice for every time you go to the mikveh putting on the clothing? Talmud Loima Upashat V'rachatz V'lavas. The pasuk says that when there's a pasuk that one of the psukim that says Upashat is bigger than V'rachatz, and then V'lavash here. You see, if you look at the psukim, according to Rebbe, you go back to the original pasuk Rabbi Yehuda used, and he uses that as that's referring to Kiddush Yadayim V'raglayim. You see, this is pasuk in the other this font Hebrew is the pasuk that Rebbe uses. Rabbi Yehuda used this pasuk. So what does Rebbe do with this pasuk? Rebbe uses this pasuk to teach you that you have to have Kiddush Yadayim V'raglayim twice when you're changing the clothing. So and he learns this. Pashak is big day bod asher lavash. You take off the linen clothing. The rachatz doesn't mean you go to the mikvah. Rachatz means you do Kiddush Yadayim V'raglayim, and then you put on clothing again. And then it says v'rachatz, so we use v'rachatz both by taking off clothing and v'rachatz by putting on clothing, that you need to have Kiddush Yadayim V'raglayim prior to you taking off the clothing, and as soon as you put on the clothing, you need to have Kiddush Yadayim V'raglayim. That is the opinion of, so Rebbe has a source pasuk that you need Kiddush Yadayim V'raglayim. Comes along Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon. Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon Oimer, how does he know that you have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'raglayim every time you change the clothing? How do you know that? So he says, I don't need a source pasuk. Kal v'chomer, I have a kal v'chomer. Uma b'mokum she'ein tolen tvila. A regular service, a kohen that wants to start service of the day. Really, he does not need to go to the mikveh. It's only the Rabbanan you go to the mikveh, but only Ben Zoma held it's the Raisa, but the most held it's the Rabbanan. So when you start the service of the day, you don't need to go to the mikveh. But nevertheless, Ton Kiddush, you need to be Mikadosh Yadayim V'raglayim, because the Chumash says that prior to every service, which we have over here, the pasuk says at the bottom, you make the kiyur and the tanoi, and you have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'raglayim bevoyam el oil moed. Before you do the service, you need to do Kiddush Yadayim V'raglayim. So on a normal day, when you don't need to go to the mikveh, you need to do Kiddush Yadayim V'raglayim, Mokom Shetor Tvila, in the place in Yom Kippur where you're going to require the person to go to the mikveh, Ein Adin Shiktoin Kiddush. Certainly, you should need Kiddush Yadayim V'raglayim. So the Gemara asks on Rabbi Elazar B'Rab Shimon, Ima lahalan Kiddush Echad Avkad Kiddush Echad. But on a typical day, you have to be Mekadosh Yadayim V'raglayim only once. And so maybe I would say that on Yom Kippur, only once you have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'raglayim. So the Gemara says, we have an extra pasuk. The pasuk says, "Uva aharing el oil moed ufoshat es bigdei habod ashalova." Aaron, this first pasuk, the Aaron walked into the Kodesh Kedoshim, and then when he's done, he takes off his linen clothing that he wore. This asher lavash is extra. Ma Talmud loima asher lavash. What does the pasuk mean to say that he wore? Takes off the linen clothing that he wore. Klum odem poishet elam asher lavash. A person doesn't take off clothing, only what you're wearing. This asher lavash, where else are you going to put the clothing? The clothing is what's on your body. Ella, what does the pasuk say? Lahakas pshita lilvisha. We're comparing taking off the clothing to putting on the clothing. Ma levisha ton kiddush. When you put on the clothing, you certainly need kiddush because that's on a normal day. A kohen puts on his clothing, he needs kiddush yadayim raglayim. Pshita, when you take off the clothing, ton kiddush, you need to do kiddush yadayim raglayim. So basically, that this ends the brisa. We have two sources of where you have to have 10 times kiddush. According to Rebbe, you have a pasuk. According to Rabbi Lazar Bar Shimon, it's a kal v'chomer. You can deduce it on your own. You don't need a pasuk for it. Now that ends the brisa. Now we just go back and just examine the brisa a little bit, and it's pretty simple, straightforward. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. We started the brisa that said Rabbi Yehuda said, how do I know that you have to go to mikveh 5 times and 10 times to kiddush yadayim raglayim? So Rabbi Yehuda brought a pasuk. Talmud loyme v'ara haran eloyim loyim rechaz b'sar b'mayim v'kam kodesh halamata shcham shana ma'avay levoy ton tvila. So that was Rabbi Yehuda's source pasuk. So I pointed out to you, but that source pasuk is only when somebody is switching from the white clothing into the gold clothing. Ashkachan me big day love and le big day zahav. We find that when you switch from the white clothing to the gold clothing, that's when you have to go to the mikveh. How do you know? How do I know if I switch from the gold back to the white? How do I know that you need to go to the mikveh there? So we go to Lamed Beis Amud Sheni. Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, Kal v'chomer. I could figure it out of myself. Ma big day zahav. Just like when you switching from the white clothing, from the linen clothing, into the gold clothing. You say you go to the mikveh, and the gold clothing is on a lower level of kedusha than the linen clothing. Why? Because with the gold clothing, shein kohen nichnas behem lifnai v'lifnim. A kohen does not go into the kodesh kedoshim with the gold clothing. So which is on a lower level of kedusha? The big day zahav. And yet you tell me you need a tvila, ta'on tvila. You need tvila. Big day lavam. So when I'm switching from the gold to the higher kedusha digga clothing of the white clothing, with these clothing, I'm going very inside. Certainly, I should need tefillah. So that is that's certainly I need tefillah because you're going from a lower kedusha clothing into a higher kedusha clothing. So that's how you know when you switch from gold to linen, you need to need tefillah. So the Gemara says, I could ask on that logical deduction. Why? I could ask a question. The reason why, when you switch from white clothing to gold clothing, Big Day Zav has a Mila, has an advantage over the white clothing. Mala Big Day Zav shekain kaparasa meruva. It's used all year round, and it's forgiving more than a bunch of averas. You see, the Big Day Lavan was only used to forgive Tumas Migdash Kadoshev, something that when a person entered the base of Migdash and he had Tumah and eating Kachim Betumah, but it was not a universal clothing that brought Kapara. But you see, the gold clothing brought Kapara for many different types of Averis. Therefore, the gold clothing have a certain Kedusha to it more than the white clothing. So therefore, that's why you go to the mikveh. So again, how would I know, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that when you switch from the gold to the white, would you need to go to the mikveh? Ella, says the Gemara, Nafkele mid the Rebbe. He will use Rebbe's pasuk. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda uses this pasuk we'll call number 1. He will use this pasuk that tells me that when you switch out of the linen clothing into the gold clothing, you have to go to the mikveh. And then he'll use Rebbe's pasuk of Ksonis Bad Kodesh Yilbosh, means when you switch from gold to linen, right? You go the other direction, you still have to go to the mikveh. So that's Rabbi Yehuda actually needs both psukim. Now the Gemara analyzes Rebbe. Rebbe said, Menayin lechamish tvilas vasar kedushas tevaba koy gadol bakash by beyoyim. Talmud loy miksenis bad koy deshis milbash halamatash chamishanim avoidal avoidal showing tvila. So Rabbi uses pasuk number 2, which describes when you take off the gold and you go into the linen clothing, you need to go to the mikveh. So ashkacham, this is how we find mi bigdei zahav, the bigdei lavan. If you switch from gold clothing to white clothing, that's when you go to the mikveh. How do I know if you go mi bigdei lavan, le bigdei zahav menayim? How do I know if you go from white clothing to the gold clothing? How do you know you have to go to the mikveh? Maybe the white clothing is more holy than the gold clothing. Taught Rabbi Shmuel, not so. Rabbi Shmuel taught that Kal v'chomer I could figure it out on myself. Ma bigdei lavan. The bigdei lavan, although it's a nice holy clothing, but she'ein kaparasa meruba. It's not used often. It doesn't bring forgiveness. It doesn't mechaper on a lot of things. It's only for a certain types of averis, tu'un and tvila. But yet the Torah requires when you put them on, you need tvila. Bigdei zahav, but the gold clothing, shekaparasa meruba, bigdei zahav, which has a lot of holiness to it because it's used all year and it's mechaper on a myriad of averis. Einidin certainly should tune tefillah. Certainly it needs tefillah. So again, all you need is pasuk number 2 to teach you of tefillah, that you know that when you switch into the bigdei lavan, you have to go to the mikveh. And on my own, logically, I could deduce that if you're switching to the bigdei lavan, you need tefillah. If you switch into the bigdei zahav, certainly you need tefillah. So the Gemara says, no, I would think that only by bigdei lavan you need to go to the mikveh. Because mal the bigdei vanam shekain nichnas behem lefnai v'lefnim. You go into the kodesh kadashim. You go where the aron is. That's why you need to go to the mikveh when you put on white clothing. But maybe when you put on gold clothing, you don't have to go to the mikveh. So again, what would be the source that when you switch in the other direction, you would have to go to the mikveh, according to Rebbe? So Rebbe has another pasuk. Hainu diktani. That's what Rebbe said. V'oimer, there's a pasuk that says bigdei kodesh heim v'rochatzas b'sorei b'mayim ulveishon. You look at the pasuk says a bigdei kodesh right over here at the end of the pasuk. Bigdei kodesh heim. These are holy clothing. Bigdei kodesh means the Torah is telling you that both the gold and the white clothing are holy clothing, and therefore, just like when you switch to the white clothing, you have to go to the mikveh. When you go to the gold clothing, you also have to go to the mikveh. It's interesting, by the way, as a side point, that the Gemara doesn't know is if the white clothing which are worn on Yom Kippur is a higher kedusha, or maybe the bigdei zahav, which is worn all year round, it has more kedusha dik. The Gemara is not sure. This similar Gemara came up in a question when they had somebody who passed away in a very big gadol, and they weren't sure to bury him in his Shabbos talis, because the Shabbos was a very kedusha dik time, but it's only used once a week. Or should you bury him in the weekday talis, which he used every day? So they started examining this Gemara to figure out
what they do.
I didn't see the answer. I only see these questions. But this is the gadol they asked was the Sfas Emes. He passed away in the mid 1800s, I think so, or early 1900s. And the gadol they asked was the Avnei Nezer. But here again, it's the question: what was more kedusha?
But the begadim, basically, it's going from kedusha to kedusha, basically.
Right, but the pasuk only describes in each pasuk. This pasuk is only described in one direction. You need to go to the mikvah.
That's from makom to makom, from bifnim, from the chutz. But I'm talking about, like, I think the idea is that what they settled on was the fact that both sets of clothing were kadosh, and that's why I think maybe that's why in that sense you would have to maybe just do the sanctification and the tefillah.
Right, for both. For whether you
both.
That's what the Gemara left it as.
Right.
But you see that the Gemara is backing away, which maybe you should only go to the mikveh for the white clothing. Maybe you should only go to the mikveh for the gold clothing.
Right.
So one you use all week, and one is only used in the whole on Yom Kippur.
But both in their own right are kadosh.
Right. That's what the Gemara established.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just finish. We said that there are 5 services done on Yom Kippur. Talmud Shachar, they did the carbon Talmud in the morning, but big day Zahav, wearing the globe. Avodah Sayim, the service of the day, big day Lavan. Eloi ve'el ha'am, big day Zahav. The ram and the ram, he switched back into the gold. Then he went back to Kafel Machta, big day Lavan. He went back to take out the shovel and the spoon that he left there with the big day Lavan. Talmud Shebein Abayim, big day Zahav. By the way, he could have taken out the kaf. The kaf is the spoon that he poured it into his hands and then used that to pour it onto the. He could have always, right then and there, just left the shovel there and walked out with the spoon. He left the spoon and the shovel there, right? You see, he's putting it on his hands over here. He was not allowed to take it with the spoon and put it onto the coals. It had to be mamish with his hands, putting it on the coals. So the spoon is out of the picture over here. So when he walked out the first time, he could have walked out with the spoon. Why do you think he left it there to come pick it up later? The answer is because the Tzedukim felt that you were supposed to make the smoke outside the Kodesh Kodashim. You don't even bring in the spoon into the Kodesh Kodashim. So again, to counteract the Tzedukim, we leave the spoon there as long as we can and make it that they go together, hand in hand, spoon and shovel, to show that the Torah, that even though it's not so written in the Torah, that the requirement is to pour the ketoras right when you're there inside, not before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now, so then that's it. This pasuk, according to Rebbe, this pasuk is you see, according to Rebbe, I want to point out, Rebbe used this pasuk to teach you that what? That you go to the mikvah. So Rebbe uses pasuk number 1 to teach you that you do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. So what the Gemara is going to ask, that you do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. So the Gemara is going to ask, but this uses the word v'rachatz. Rachatz is a word used for mikvah. So the Gemara is going to say, since you don't need it to teach you mikvah because you learn it from this pasuk, so v'rachatz over here will teach you that you also need kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. That's what the Gemara is just saying. It says that's a word that's used for going to the mikvah. So the Gemara says, you don't need it to teach you mikvah because I know it from another pasuk, the nafkalei big day kodesh, which tells you that whether you're switching from big day Lavan to big day Zav, you always need to go to the mikvah. So we use it for the word for kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. So Gemara asks, v'lichtev rachmana b'l'shain kiddush. Let the Torah write the word kiddush. If it means doing kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, why does the pasuk use the word v'rachatz? You actually go wash your whole body. That's not a language that's used for washing your hands and feet. So Hakamashmal, it's teaching you the tefillah kiddush, that the tefillah should be like kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Ma kiddush b'makom kadosh, just like the kiddush yadayim v'raglayim was in a holy place. Af tefillah, so also the mikveh has to be b'makom kadosh. So it's another source that the mikveh had to be in the Beis Hamikdash proper, just like the kior was in the Beis Hamikdash, and that's where you did the kiddush yadayim v'raglayim always. So also the mikvah on Yom Kippur had to be in a makom kadosh. One more point: Rabbi Yehuda kiddush manole. Rabbi Yehuda, how does he know kiddush yadayim v'raglayim? Rabbi Yehuda, he used source number 1 to teach you that when you go from linen to gold, you go to the mikvah. Source number 2 taught you when you go from gold to linen, you have to put on go to the mikvah. So he needed both psukim. So the Gemara's question is, how would he know that you do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim? So again, there the Gemara is going to say, nafkalei mid Rab Elazar b'Rab Shimon. He learned it from Rab Elazar from Rab Shimon. Who Rab Elazar b'Rab Shimon, if you remember in the Brisa, he learned the whole inyan of kiddush yadayim v'raglayim from a kal v'chayma. He figured it out on his own. That if you're going to the mikveh, you certainly have to do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. So you don't need a source pasuk to tell you that you need kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. You could figure that out on your own. If the Torah is requiring you to go to the mikveh, you certainly need to go to do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Gemara continues, Amar Rav Chizda, Hod Rebbe, Mapke mid Rab Meir, Umapke mid Rabbanim. Rebbe said a very interesting thing. Rebbe said you learn it from Poshat, Barochat to Poshat. Rebbe, according to the way Rav Chizda understood Rebbe, he understood that how do you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim? The Kohen gets totally undressed. You do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, go to the mikvah. After coming out of the mikveh again, you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, and then put on the clothing. That's the way Rebbe used the language of how he did Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. You did it both without wearing clothing. But Mapke, that's not like Rab Meir, Umapke midrabanan. And it's not like the opinion of Rabbanim, which we discussed a little bit yesterday. Mapke midrabanan, it's certainly not like the Rabbanim. The Rabbanan amrei kishu lavish mekadosh. Rabbanan say that the second Kiddush means you first put on the clothing, and then you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. V'ihu Amar, but Rebbe said, Kshu Paishet Mekadosh, when you're not wearing any clothing, you do the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Right when you come out of the mikvah, you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. And Umakim with Rab Meir, and it's not like Rab Meir either, because although Rab Meir agrees with Rebbe that when you take off the clothing, you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, the second Kiddush, he holds that you first put on the clothing and then do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Either Rameir or Mahach Kiddush Basra, the second Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, Kshu Lavish Mekadosh. You're putting it on when you're wearing the clothing. Vi Omar Kshu Paishet Mekadosh. And Rebbe said you do both without wearing clothing. So basically, Rebbe is not like any one of them, because Rebbe seems to hold, according to Rav Papa's understanding of Rebbe, is the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim means you take off your clothing, do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, go into the mikvah, come out of the mikvah, do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, still without your clothing, and then put on the clothing. Because Pashat Barachat's a Pashat. So that's when you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, twice without wearing clothing. So Amar Rav Acha by Yaakov, Rav Acha says not so. You're reading Rebbe wrong. Hakol Maidim, everybody would agree. The Kiddush Sheni, the second time you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, Shaloivish V'achar Kach Mekadosh. First you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, and then first you put on the clothing, and then you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. You shouldn't do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim without clothing. You first put on the clothing, and then you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. My time, what's the reason? The Amakara, the pasuk says, Oy v'gishtam el mizbeach. When you come close to the mizbeach, that the Torah says, do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, and the next thing you do is get to the mizbeach. When the Torah has the pasuk that describes Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, the Torah says that the next thing after you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim is you go right to the mizbeach. So the only thing that's left to do is get to the mizbeach. Yotzezeh, but in the scenario that you played out, you're missing two steps. Shemachusa levisha, you're missing putting on the clothing, the gisha, and doing the service by the mizbeach. So there's a special pasuk that requires you to put the clothing on first and then do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. And Rebbe would not disagree with that. That's what Rebbe would not disagree with that. And then the Gemara just says, because if Rebbe would disagree, if you hold that Rebbe would agree with this idea that you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim while wearing your clothing, then it comes out, according to Rebbe, the Gemara is going to say that if they're mutually exclusive, because if he held that you do twice Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim without clothing and once after you put it on, then you're going to have 15 Kiddush Yadayim Raglayims. Amalei Rav Acha beid Rav Ashi, Law Rav Chizda Islay Rav Acha, but Law Rav Acha Islay Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda, who held that Rebbe held Rav Chizda's opinion that Rebbe's opinion is that you do both Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim without clothing. He does not agree with Rav Acha. V'loy Rav Acha Islay Rav Chizda. And Rav Acha's opinion of that you have to do the second Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim while you're wearing the clothing does not hold like Rav Chizda that you do two while you're not wearing the clothing. Because the Imkain, if they both agreed with each other, that means Rebbe would hold you do two while you're not wearing clothing. And then one more after you wear Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, and you're doing 3 Kiddush Yadayim Raglayims for every switch, then you can do 3 times 5, then came the Rebbe Havele Chameis Kedushin. You're going to have 15 times Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. And therefore, we have Halacha L'Meshim Sinai that you only do 10. So everybody would agree that the second Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim that you do, you only do 2 Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim, and the second one is while you're wearing the clothing. But according to Rabbanan, even the first one, when you take off the clothing, you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim before you take off the clothing. According to Rab Meir, after you take off the clothing, without wearing clothing, you do a Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So that's a little technical of when exactly the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Certainly, one of them was done while you were wearing the clothing. The question was when you were switching out of the previous clothing. According to Rabbanan, before you take off that clothing, you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. According to Rab Meir, you strip down without any clothing on, and then you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. Because according to Rab Meir, you're actually doing Kiddush Yadayim twice Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim for just putting on clothing. You don't do any Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim for taking off of clothing. But according to Rabbanan, before you take off of clothing, that's when you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim. So again, basically, just what we learned today is the source of all of the tefillos and the Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim.
When they did the Kiddush Raglayim or Yadayim, was there a bracha made?
I think so. Yes.
How could they do that naked?
That's a good question. How did it, there must have been a bracha.
Isn't there a bracha that you say when you go to the mikveh? That you say
Yeah,
when
but
you
you're
make it?
underwater. You're
Underwater.
No,
Okay.
but
As
you're
long as you
covered.
right.
No, it's
Right.
specifically when the mikveh you're covered.
That's right. Exactly. You cover the waist down from the waist
Right.
down. Right.
Right, but if they're washing their hands and their feet
Right.
and they're not
Right.
dressed,
Right.
how are they allowed to make a bracha?
Right.
That's a good point.
That's a fascinating question. That's a good question. Because they certainly, I wouldn't imagine they didn't go do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim without a bracha. It's an open chumash that says before you do the service, the pasuk says, this is what you're supposed to do. It's a mitzvah essay to do this. So in a normal situation, you did Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim after you wore the clothing. But on Yom Kippur, according to Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Meir, you were not wearing clothing doing Kiddush Yadayim. Only according to Rabbi Meir, this question is.
It's still a valid
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Very valid question.
You know, it also makes sense. I was thinking about the Rabbanan, their take on it is to wash your hands before you take off your clothing. That would make more sense because in case you would somehow mitame your hands, if you're touching the begadim already without washing, make more sense to wash your hands and then take off your clothing.
Yes, but the problem with the Rabbanan is this part. At the 10th, when you finish right over here, when you finish the final service of you finished your job. The day is over right over here. You did the final Talmud Bavli. You're taking off your clothing. You do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim to put on your normal suit. He's putting on his regular, normal clothing, his weekday clothing. Why would you do Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim and then put on weekday clothing?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So the Rabbi Hirsch. Rabbi Hirsch wanted to say that the idea was to take, a person leaves, like say the learning, let's say, you're supposed to take the learning with you into the chulin, into the secular. So the idea he did Kiddush Yadayim Raglayim as he puts on the clothing because he wants to make the continuation of what the
Kedusha.
Kedusha into the weekday.
Yeah, very good point. Very nice. Okay.
I want to wish everybody a nice Yom Tov. I'm available Sunday if anybody is interested to spend time to learn, but maybe it would be in the morning to learn the Daf.
I'm good.
Let's speak let's do the WhatsApp group on Wednesday night and on let's say Shabbos and figure it out.
Right. So I'll just send it out to feelers, and if anybody can make it. If not, we'll just reconvene. I guess after Yom Tov.
That too. Okay. Have a good Shabbos. Good Yom Tov, everybody.
A good Shabbos and
Good Shabbos. Good Yom Tov.
Shkoyach.
Bye-bye.